When we speak about diplomacy, we use words like sensitivity, tact, art, relations, influence, and representation. And this building is a diplomatic actor. Cambridge Central Mosque was completed in 2019, 10 years after its initial conceptualization. It's an eco-friendly mosque situated on Mill Road in the UK. It functions as a diplomatic actor on 4 main levels: the physical structure of the building, the international level, the intra-faith level, and the local level, divided into the city and the university. There is a vast nexus of actors around Cambridge Central Mosque's diplomacy. There's the building itself, the university with students, governance, and religious actors, Cambridge Muslim College, which sits at the intersection of these two places, the city with local politicians and the neighbourhood on Mill Road, and international actors such as sponsors and materials that came from elsewhere. An essential part of this network is Dr. Timothy Winter, who's a lecturer in Islamic Studies at the University of Cambridge, the senior treasurer of the university's Islamic Society, the founder and dean of Cambridge Muslim College, and the chairman of the Cambridge Central Mosque Trust. In a conference with local Muslims, he spoke of the upcoming mosque as a space that will continue transforming souls, like a laboratory. Cambridge Central Mosque thus offers us the chance to explore a place and narrative that synthesize science, faith, and community. The mosque grew out of necessity when there was no more prayer space for Muslims in Cambridge. However, the driving force behind it is to go beyond necessity and practicality. Both Dr. Winter and the architects Mark Sparfield sought to push the concept of the mosque beyond what they saw as often shabbily constructed boxes, whose appearance merely reflected the main country of origin of the funding or of the congregation. The idea was to make the first truly British mosque, something that would showcase heritage, culture, and knowledge, and of which people could be proud. This is the first step of positioning the mosque as a diplomatic actor. According to Dr. Winter, it's changing the perception of Islam and uplifting the area, and this is an important dual purpose. But there's a tension here, as the visibility of mosques and Islam sometimes prompt hostility towards the Muslim community. Central to the idea of Cambridge Central Mosque is to harness this visibility into an asset. In order to do so, a participatory approach has run all the way through the design of the mosque in order to adapt its presence and functioning to meet the locals' needs. So local residents on Mill Road, worried about the new sights and sounds that a mosque might bring, were surveyed and called in for consultations to find out what they wanted and needed out of a new building on their road. And one of the biggest things that came out was the call for gardens. Safe, green, public spaces that could be part of their identity and enrich the lives of their families and children. The locals and the designers also wanted to ensure that the building looked like it belonged there. So while the mosque's exterior is adorned with Arabic inscriptions, the colour is an allusion to the Galt brickwork so ubiquitous across Cambridge homes and colleges. And then you enter the gardens, symbol-laden and actively ecological. They offer a meditative space that integrates British and Islamic gardens. The designer, herself a convert to Islam, envisages enlightening the UK to the idea that paradise is a garden. Inverting that enlightened ignorant binary pushes the mosque beyond improving Muslims' image and towards sharing heritage and knowledge and forging meaningful interactions. Anyone who's visited a Cambridge college will notice a striking similarity between the mosque's fourfold or charbagh garden and the courtyards scattered across the university. After the garden, you walk through the glass front to enter the mosque, and the first thing that strikes you is the ceiling. Arguably one of the most iconic images of Cambridge is King's College Chapel, about 3 kilometres away from Cambridge Central Mosque. And who would have imagined that almost 600 years later, its famous fan-vaulted Gothic ceilings would be echoed in the high, tree-trunk-esque architecture of a mosque? Mostly due to Timothy Winter's personal connections, or through donations, there are also 2 important international structural elements to the mosque from Jerusalem and Mecca. The interfaith relations of the mosque remain relatively institutional, centered around conferences, events, and official visits. That said, on the symbolic level, there's an important aspect to how people are welcomed to the mosque. Anyone who enters is immediately offered a tour, a book, or a seat at the cafe. Just how far this has reached the local interfaith community remains to be answered. The intra-faith initiatives are more inescapable, as any Muslim entering the mosque inextricably participates in an act of Muslim unity. The prayer hall's 16 pillars represent the 12 Shia imams and 4 Sunni schools of thought. only English and Classical Arabic are used for prayers and sermons, despite, or because of, Cambridge Muslims' immense linguistic diversity. And no political stances are permitted in sermons or otherwise. The mosque's conception of intrafaith unity includes women alongside nationalities and sects, using consultations with local women to provide flexibility for the present and the future. This includes screens to adjust for privacy preferences and demographic changes, more public and more traditional sections, and soundproof glass-walled spaces to welcome women with young children. Given the parking, family, and prayer space, Cambridge Muslims would need to actively choose to avoid being part of the mosque's intrafaith structure. For university students, the mosque is a little out of their way, but its presence and community are increasingly important factors for families of incoming Muslim students. On an institutional level, the relationship with the university seems stable but passive. A university representative was on the design jury, the vice-chancellor has visited the mosque, and there were conversations about the academic opportunities of collaboration. However, Dr. Winter notes that while the university is aware that its physical and cultural structures do not reflect the current student and national demographics, it does not feel that it's its place to spend large sums to address this. It appears that the mosque is not seen as an opportunity for diplomacy by the university itself. There is a mention of a right-wing protest against the mosque, and, interestingly, a protest by the group Sikhs Against Sharia. But the right-wing protest was dismissed as consisting mostly of non-Cambridge individuals, and whose opposition is claimed to have fallen away. Although there are no other identifiably detrimental effects of the mosque, my research suggests that the mosque's contribution to cohesion is quieter and perhaps less measurable than expected. And perhaps this quietness is itself the mosque's strength in cohesion, offering an expansive, open, visibly Muslim space that is precisely not exclusively Muslim. It involves non-Muslim university and city representatives, and seemingly avoids the typical media opposition to mosques. And the mosque publicly uses this participatory strategy to its advantage, describing itself on its website as a community project at every stage of its development. Keeping in mind the relevance of the visibility of the mosque, its coverage in the media was actually relatively neutral. Particularly interesting is a moment of local diplomacy in which the mosque acts as a point of reciprocal legitimation, with politicians legitimizing the mosque, and thereby its community, and their support for the mosque legitimizing their own liberal stances. In the face of considerable Islamophobia in the UK, Labour MP Daniel Zeichner publicly endorsed the mosque, explicitly distancing Cambridge's view from Trump's and citing their support for this project as proof of such distance. The most significant local clash around the mosque has actually arisen around its international funding. While there were several state, organisation and individual donors from around the world, the Turkish government made the largest donation to Cambridge Central Mosque. There are also trustees on the board of directors nominated by Turkey's Directorate of Religious Affairs, and the mosque was officially opened by Turkey's President Erdogan. So while the visibility of the structure and event enables greater claims to citizenship and belonging, it also opens them up to greater public scrutiny. There is transparency on the mosque's website about funding, but there's a wider debate on the concept of mosque diplomacy, whether it's insidious, even malicious, or normal and justified. There is growing funding for the Religious Affairs Directorate in Turkey, and this so-called mosque diplomacy can be seen as a white flag or as an unnecessary, even hypocritical spectacle. Some see tensions between the actions and narratives behind this mosque diplomacy and existing conflicts with and within Turkey. Others fear that they'll lead to polarization of Muslims or Turkish diasporas. Still others see Turkey as the sole hope for a moderate Islam in the area, and argue that suspicions of the mosque and Erdogan will only make relations and integration worse. This diversity of responses and the dominance of support for Erdogan from Muslim populations around the world was evident in a small social media analysis. On a YouTube video of Erdogan's opening of Cambridge Central Mosque, out of 645 comments, 13 were negative, concerning fears of Muslim expansion and criticism of heavy government spending when some citizens in Turkey lacked basic provisions and rights. 4 were bigotry towards Muslims or Islam, while the majority of the rest were pro-Erdogan comments from Turks and non-Turks. Depending on the actor, Turkey's enabling the mosque to exist is seen as both an accomplishment and a threat in terms of faith and more traditional diplomacy. Cambridge Central Mosque offers a new idea of mosque diplomacy, a concrete alternative to mosques and Muslims seen as out of place, intrusive, or taking from the local community. It's also possible that it could prompt other reconceptualizations of how inter- and intrafaith relations can develop more holistically and sustainably, both for society and the environment. It's important that the project's planning, funding, and legitimation depend significantly on Dr. Winter, who, as an academic and Islamic leader with a privileged background, personal connections, and visible belonging, enables an otherwise elusive network of trust and collaboration. While the connections between the university's Muslim community and the city are not as strong as I'd hoped, they are positive and they look to be growing. But the absence of active institutional engagement from the university remains a notable limitation. Finally, two important variables stand out on the international front, with local implications. Firstly, the possibility of a crisis involving Turkey that succeeds in mobilizing vast international communities, much like the events that recently unfolded around Israel and Palestine. Secondly, a potential shift in the government's stance towards calls for greater influence on the mosque. Cambridge Central Mosque's hitherto arm's-length portrayal of Turkey's role may be thrown into doubt, or the trust, legitimacy, and even celebration of the mosque may face a setback. To continue to develop as a laboratory for souls, a symbol of unity and neutrality, the mosque will have to trace a strategic path between the age-old institutions that surround it and the rising powers that support it.